Why do you think it is that the United States government has become so large, especially on the foundation that the founding fathers set, with the Constitution designing a very limited government that could only do things expressly listed in the Constitution, with the Constitution itself saying that the government was not allowed to do anything unless it was explicitly listed? How do you go from that to a little over 250 years later to the place we are at today? Well, there's an old quote that says, "Every nation gets the government it deserves." And this video is going to be a very hard pill to swallow for many, but I think it's extremely important that we understand that any time we relinquish or abdicate a responsibility that we have, somebody who is absolutely hungry for power will take our place. We let go of a burden that we are supposed to be carrying. Somebody else who wants to wield it to their own advantage will pick it up instead. In this video, we are going to look at the 6 largest things that the government does today, becoming such a large burden on the backs of Americans, and how they only stepped into these roles because somebody else set down their responsibility. We're gonna look at healthcare, eldercare, education, homeless and hungry, enforcing morality, and the military. And like I said, this is gonna be a tough pill to swallow. Many people will probably dislike this video very much. If you don't know who I am, my name is Joe Brown and I run Heresy Financial University, where I teach people how to get higher returns on their investments while at the same time taking on much less risk by understanding and learning how markets actually work. If you'd like to join, link is in the description below. First, let's take a look at healthcare. Between just Medicare and Medicaid, healthcare is the largest line item on the US government's budget today. Now, those 2 line items are far from the only dollars that the US government spends on healthcare. One example of money the US government spends on healthcare that doesn't show up in those 2 categories is on money spent on research and development of new medications and new treatments. The government takes money from taxpayers every year and hands this money out to universities to research new ways to deal with diseases, coming up with new medications, new treatments. So the government, through taxpayers, is subsidizing and paying for all of this new research. And then pharmaceutical companies who haven't spent the money on researching and developing those treatments, whenever a treatment does get made, paid for by taxpayers through no choice of their own, pharmaceutical companies purchase these treatments, these medications, patent them, and then have a government granted monopoly on distributing and charging excess amounts of dollars on those treatments that they didn't have to pay for. Now, that's just one example of the terrible system that we have in place today with healthcare and how the government's involvement in healthcare has caused the worst performance in healthcare relative to the number of dollars spent in the entire world. Not to mention the fact that the US government is directly the one that created the food pyramid. And by the way, the food pyramid was started to fatten up inner city kids who were underfed and starving. And when that got fixed, they just used the exact same food pyramid to address the new issue, which was people gaining too much weight. Obviously, if you use the same food pyramid, the same dietary guidelines that was used to increase the weight of inner city kids, that's not going to solve the problem of people being overweight. It's going to contribute to the problem. So we have one of the most unhealthy populations on the planet, some of the highest spending on healthcare as a result, and some of the lowest performance of those dollars as well. Healthcare is one of the largest things the US government is involved in, and it does an absolutely terrible job at it. But guess what? The American government was not always the one in charge of healthcare. American churches and American charities are the ones who used to take care of all of this. That responsibility was abdicated. The job still had to get done, so the government stepped in its place instead. Of course, it's going to do a much worse job at it. So guess what? It's our responsibility to put the government out of the job of healthcare, pick the burden back up again. We do this by being much healthier individuals and not having to use the healthcare system. We do this by pioneering better free market alternatives to the current healthcare system. We do this through charity, donations, and voluntarily helping people pay for healthcare and not relying on somebody else taking money from somebody else to pay for these people instead. It may not be our fault that the country's in this situation, but it is our responsibility to fix it. Next, let's look at eldercare. Social Security is the second largest line item on the government's budget, coming in at $1.2 trillion for 2022. The Social Security Trust Fund is set to be depleted by 2034, just 11 years from today. The government has done an absolutely terrible job of, number one, providing for senior citizens. Number two, the provisions for senior citizens actually keeping pace with inflation. And number three, making sure that the money is managed in a way where it won't run out. And clearly, we can see by now the amount of money going in is not nearly enough to pay for the amount of money set to go out. And within just 11 years, the fund will be dry. But guess what? The government is not supposed to be in the business of eldercare. This is something that individuals, families, and again, churches are supposed to do. For most of American history, heck, most of human history, eldercare was done by families. And when good individuals walk away from the responsibility that is theirs, somebody else who wants to wield it for power will pick it up. And mark my words, within the next 11 years, the Social Security crisis and elders all across our nation being left with less money, or in some cases, a lot less, this crisis will absolutely be used to increase certain people's power. Because individuals and families have not done their jobs at providing for their own. The government is stepping in, using it to increase its own power. It may not be our fault that our nation is in this predicament, but it is our responsibility to fix it. You noticing a trend yet? By the way, guys, I'm going to be speaking at the Stock Pulse Silver Symposium about the history and future of sound money. It's in Las Vegas from September 29th through October 1st. There's going to be a ton of other great speakers there. There are going to be plenty of opportunities for us to do meet and greet, hang out, get some drinks together. I'd love to meet you there. And everybody who shows up is going to get 1 ounce of silver as well, a 1 ounce silver coin. So I'd love to see you there. There's a discount link, 10% off in the description below. So sign up there, get that discount, and tickets are running out, so sign up soon. Moving on to education. In 2022, the US government spent $482 billion on student loan programs. In an effort to get more kids to go to college, the government made an absolutely asinine decision to make student loans backed up by the government. That meant lenders wouldn't have to worry about students defaulting on their payments anymore. Those loans were guaranteed by the US government, which means a student who is by definition the worst borrower because they have no assets, no job history, and no income can now borrow hundreds of thousands of dollars, get themselves into debt forever in order to get a degree. This means degrees obviously get more expensive because the customer now has virtually unlimited money guaranteed by the government. And guess what? The worst part is students can never get away from these loans. This is the one type of debt that you can never get away from. Even if you go through bankruptcy, you still have to pay those student loans. Now, student loans are far from the only government involvement in education. Obviously, we have state governments in education in every single state, and we have the abysmal performance of public schools across the country, with the American education system being ranked lower and lower every year, despite the fact that spending on public education in the United States per student goes up every year. But again, it wasn't always this way. Any history buffs out there remember who used to be the ones that did all education for all students in the United States? That's right. Churches. And guess how much it cost? Yet another responsibility that good people abdicated that people who wanted more power picked up instead, with worse results for everyone. Care for the homeless and hungry is yet another example of federal governments, state governments, and city governments spending hundreds of billions of dollars every single year, yet the problem is getting worse, not better. This is yet another example of an area that especially churches and charities, good people donating to food pantries, homeless shelters, rehabilitation centers, people with skin in the game helping out their own local communities, have abdicated these responsibilities responsibilities. Somebody has to do it. The government steps in and obviously does a worse job. Number 5 is enforcing morality. And along the exact same trend, we see the government, the courts, and legislation trying to impose a specific morality on its people. And because that's coming from a source of centralized power, which always comes with hidden intentions, powers behind the scenes pulling strings for their own hidden benefits, this will be distorted and ultimately just will not work. You cannot legislate morality. Any system will be corrupted if the people themselves are corrupt. And as the percent of Americans who belong to a church, a synagogue, or a mosque continues to fall year after year, decade after decade, it is no wonder that our institutions, our governments, our morality is worsening and deteriorating in front of our eyes. Individuals, families, local communities, churches, mosques, and synagogues used to be the places that enforced morality. Abdicating that responsibility and individuals walking away from that has meant the government has to step into that role, and obviously it's doing a terrible job. And finally, the military. Over the last couple of decades, it has become abundantly clear that the United States government has been playing police officer around the entire world, setting up and tearing down regimes, starting coups, establishing its own governments around the world, all for disastrous results. We've spent decades dropping bombs all over the Middle East, killing civilians by the thousands. When one government or dictatorship arises that is not friendly to the government, we fund, arm, and train local or nearby rebels to knock over that government. And then those allies we created turn into the very monsters we were trying to stop in the first place. It is an unending cycle of violence the US is imposing around the world, and it must stop. But we forget to ask, why did we get here in the first place? What is the US government actually trying to do here? An optimistic view of this is that the US government is trying to impose its morality around the entire world, just like it tries to do here. Yet in the past, people forget that when there was evil happening around the world, it used to be Christian missionaries who would go and stop it. But instead of going in from the top down with a military, with violence, toppling a regime and trying to set up a new one in its place, Christian missionaries would go in from the bottom up through transformation, changing people's lives, and sharing with them a better way of life. So instead of America sending out Christian missionaries around the world, we started sending mercenaries in the military instead. It may not be our fault that the world is the way it is today, but it is our responsibility to put it back together. Now, for each of these things, I don't know when exactly it started to change. But at some point, good individuals, and especially the American church, started to abdicate its responsibilities, making the world a better place. Fixing the world, putting it back to the way it's supposed to be is the job. Most Christians think that Jesus came to take a bunch of people away from this evil world. But if you actually read the Bible, you find out that he said the exact opposite. For instance, in the Lord's Prayer, he says, making this world as it is in heaven. Our job is to bring heaven to earth, not to just sit around and wait to die someday to be taken away from this world. And when that change started happening and people started thinking of it the complete opposite way is when people started to abdicate their responsibility. But guess what? We have a job to do. And I don't care if you're religious or not. I'm sure you agree the world today is not the way it's supposed to be. And the people who are currently in power are doing a pretty good job at making it worse. So let's do something about it. Let's put things back in order. Now, personally, my number one goal is to create as much wealth as possible so that I can help as many people as possible. And that's why I make these videos. That's why I run Heresy Financial University. And that's why I preach the values that I do, because I want to attract the type of people like you and then equip you to make as much wealth as possible as well. Because the people who disagree with these values are not going to listen. They're going to create less wealth as a result. That's intentional. The more resources we have, the better of a world we can make. And just as a side note, if you secretly despise wealth and you think wealth is evil, you will never be wealthy. You will constantly push it away your whole life, and then you will never have the resources that you need to transform the world into a better place. So together, join me. Pick up as large of a burden as you can carry. Create as much wealth as possible so that you have the resources you need to fulfill the responsibility that you know you have. And together, let's put the government out of a job. As always, thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.